Hey everyone, you're listening to Beyond Recognition, an all about creativity podcast that keeps on exploring the depths of creating process from some of the world's most outstanding artists. I'm your host and the phonetical freak, Dan. As some of my friends already know, I recently got divorced, which is the reason why this podcast is coming out with a delay. It took quite some time to put myself together through this entire situation, and of course, reflection was a big part of that process, as well as the help of my friends. Thank you guys for all your support. So, at this point of my life, I was summing up these few years and got to the point when I started really releasing to some of the releases that came out in 2023, which is the direct connection with our guest today. So, Heart Cold Fire, the newest release of Therapy, was definitely one of the most enjoyable experiences for me. But also, I couldn't but mention JAAW, the newest project featuring a good number of great musicians that released their debut Superclaster LP. It got me back to the point when I discovered Therapy and got amazed with all these tendencies the band has been pushing coming from the underground, and they still do. So, our guest today is Andy Cairns, guitarist, vocalist, composer, the founding member of Therapy and JAAW. This year, one of the most well known records of Therapy, Troublegum, celebrates 30 years anniversary. The band is getting ready for a tour. They always tour, always incredible live. So I got the chance to talk to Andy about lyrics and pessimism, starting JAAW, sound experiments, the success of Therapy. We discuss life and touring experiences, of course.
All of the episodes are available at Beyond Recognition Patreon page in advance. Subscribe at patreon.com/Beyond Recognition to get exclusive content, advanced episodes, and different bonuses for our subscribers.
Right now, tune in and listen to my conversation with Andy Cairns. Being where you are right now, passing through the decades of experience of being independent artists, working with independent labels, signing deal with the major label, and coming through where you are right now, you understand that the more people are involved in the process, the more difficult it becomes. And you understand that simply by knowing how much you need to do, to get on tour, to play, and the entire fragility of the process. So getting back to working with independent labels and with Marshall Records right now, how does it make you feel?
Well, it's okay for us because we had a very good education in punk rock in Ireland. We started out where we put on our own concerts, we released our own records, we had interviews with fanzines that were run by friends. We put on gigs with other people. So we didn't sign our first major label deal until we had been going as a band for 3 years. So then, whenever we lost the major label deal, it wasn't a catastrophe for us really, because we've always been good with managing money, because we know that the most important thing is to make sure that we can run the band and run all our expenses. Um, to get the most important thing is obviously the music, but then you need to be able to get that music out to people. And also, we didn't have our pride wasn't hurt because we were no longer on a major, because we came from a punk background. We knew that it wouldn't last forever, the major label thing, because we always knew we weren't going to be the size of U2 or Guns N' Roses. So that made it a lot easier to deal with. We were very good at organizing concerts, at downsizing, at starting again from the beginning. I think the problem some bands have is when they're on a major label, they get used to the rock and roll lifestyle. And whenever they get dropped from a major, half of them miss the money that they would get from a major label, and the other half feel a sense of shame that someone has rejected them. I think with Therapy, we had neither of those things. We just said, okay, we've had an indie label years. We've been on a major. We're now back to being an indie band. That's okay. Let's deal with this.
I often think about people in sport which is a
Mm-hmm.
very good trajectory to connect with what you just said. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking about like figure skaters who
Mm-hmm.
dedicate themselves to extensive trainings and eventually
Mm-hmm.
they reach out the age where they are considered being old, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote. Some of
Yeah.
them even do in their 20s. No
Mm-hmm.
matter if you think of yourself that you are old or no, versus
Mm-hmm.
musicians, especially these days, because you understand there are a very few artists who can get the luxury of taking what they've done on pause and still not lose the attention of the fans, while some of other artists they need to tour constantly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Um, Also, I think with the sport analogy, a lot of people know that they don't plan in advance, so they think, well, they're young, and when you're young, you think life will go on forever, and then some people are taken by surprise. Not everybody is Lionel Messi. Not everyone can be the greatest footballer of all time, and it's about managing expectations. And I think with therapy, I know that when we were a four piece with Martin McCarrick and with Graham Hopkins in the band, they joined the band after the band had been successful and we were already on a major. And whenever we lost to do with the major, they certainly found it a lot more difficult to deal with than myself and Michael, the original member, because they thought they were joining a band that was a well known major label band that was going to go on and become famous and they would be part of that. But when that didn't quite happen, they got quite resentful towards me and Michael, because I think they thought they were joining a band that would make them more famous than they already were. But with us, we just think as long as we can make music, as long as we can put on concerts, we have a good plan to keep the band existing, to make sure that we get out and tour when we can, and to keep putting records out. Marshall Records is a really good home for that because for a start, they're realistic in their aims. They give us a certain amount of money to do what we need, but they don't throw money at us and expect us to be the new Foo Fighters. They've got a certain amount of money, and they know they're also clever because they know that they signed a band that have already got a fan base across the world. So they're not it's not a young band that they're going to have to try and break. We already have a certain amount of fans across the world. So Marshall know that when they release a therapy record, regardless of if it's a good therapy record or a bad one, there is a certain amount of people will buy it because of the fan base. But thankfully, the records we made for them have been good ones so far. But so it kind of works both ways. They're getting a band with a bit of experience and an existing fan base, which helps get the name of Marshall Records out to the world. And we're also getting people that are very, very understanding of what we want to do as a band.
With it, I can't but notice that still you are one of the most touring bands I personally know.
Well, the reason why therapy tours so much is two reasons. We like doing it, but also because this isn't the 90s, so we can't rely on lots and lots of record sales and things like that to make money. So whenever we go out on tour, we tour modestly. We bring a tour van, not a tour bus. We bring a small road crew that we've known for quite a few years, and we pay them fairly, and they are very hardworking. And then when we go on tour, we make money. So I know bands that are probably not as popular as Therapy that go on tour, but they want to look like rock stars, so they'll get a tour bus. Now, a tour bus is £2,500 a day.
Hmm.
A small van is about £100 a day. So, if you do a concert and you're getting paid so many £1,000s for it and you're spending a quarter of that money on the tour bus, then more money on wages for the driver. When you come home, you're not going to have enough money to pay for your rehearsal space, pay for a place where you can leave your equipment, and pay for your road crew and flights. So we have a very good way, and it's because we're old punk rockers. We kind of go, okay, well, if we do things this way, we can afford to pay all these people and exist as a band and keep on going. So that because we do like touring, and Dan, not everybody that I know that's a musician likes touring. I mean, Fife Ewing, an amazing drummer, was in the band with Therapy from the beginning. Great drummer. He hated touring. He really hated it. He didn't like it. He never liked to tour. When we went on tour, it was always you could tell he was unhappy. I know people in very famous bands that are friends of mine, but I won't embarrass them by naming them, that don't like to tour because they say they like being in the studio making records. They like being in their rehearsal space with their computer writing ideas. But whenever their management says to them, we have to go on tour, they dread that day. But we're lucky. We like going on tour. We like meeting people. We like playing shows. Being on stage is something that myself and Michael and Neil Cooper have always enjoyed doing. So it's not a difficult thing for us.
And also, I think there's an aging factor involved. Like, if you became a musician and started playing in the 80s, you managed to get through this, let's say, a number of connections through like all the clubs in the UK, which is
Mhm.
something like I've spoken to Budgie like around like
Yeah.
4 or 5 years ago, and he told me a wonderful thing that his sort of his place of existing or his place of living are clubs, theaters, and so on. And
Mhm.
if you know like his history coming from Liverpool, getting through all these underground clubs, and until
Mhm.
he moved to London in
Mhm.
79, like you understand like that's the history. And people who used to book those shows, like they later on established a well-known record labels. Just if
Mhm.
you would take like Warp for example.
Yes, yeah, good idea. Yeah, that's very true, Dan. And same with therapy. We're very lucky in that we were around at a time when it was easier for bands, I think, to get concerts. Now I look at young bands now. I've recently done a project with some other musicians called JAAW. It was an industrial noise project. Now those guys are a lot younger than me, and those guys are very talented, but they've all got two or three jobs. It's hard for them. I'm a professional musician. This is being a musician is what I do, and we've managed to make a living out of it. Between us, our management, who are good friends of ours, we've managed to make this what all we need to do for a living. But the guys in Jaw, they all have three or four different things on the go because they just by being in the bands that they're in and touring, they can't make enough money.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Adam, the drummer of Jaw, is a session drummer, and he makes all his money by playing with these wonderful bands like Pulp and Square Pusher and Goldie. And Wayne Adams, the guy that's the main guy behind the project, he runs a studio, so his main gig is a producer. But to try and get music off the ground just from bands, it's really difficult these days. If you were a young person trying to get a string of say 20 gigs in the UK together for a tour, it's really difficult. Back in our day, therapy would say, well, we know a couple of punk guys in Dublin, so we'd phone them, and we know a couple of punk guys in Birmingham. And we would, between phone calls, this is before mobile phones or internet, we would have maybe say 10 gigs and we'd do that. And when we were at one of the gigs, we'd meet some guy maybe from Scotland who'd go, have you guys ever played in Glasgow?
Mm.
And we walk into it. And then that way, as you said earlier, some of those people that did those gigs for us back in 1990, 91 are now working for record labels. They're now working for clubs, rock clubs, and things like that. The people that stayed in the business, and it works like that. So we're lucky to have built this little structure, and at the same, to a certain extent, in parts of Europe and places like that.
When you have your comfort zone, meaning a band with some people you've been working for several decades right now, which is obviously the current lineup of
Mm.
therapy, how do you feel getting into the new environment, meaning your recent project, Joe?
Well, that was good because it didn't take up too much of my time initially, and that I'm in a place at the minute where my family is older than Michael and Neil, so they both have two very young children. And anyone that has children knows that very young children, you have to be there a lot more. My son has grown up. He has a job. He lives outside of home, so I've got a lot more time to do things on my hands. Whenever the job project came in, it was a time in therapy we weren't doing anything for a month, and all I did was go and visit Wayne in the studio and send some emails back and forward. But I think it's good. I mean, Michael does some stuff with his next door neighbor. Has a project called Haunch
Mm-hmm.
that he runs, and Michael helps out with that. And I know that Neil has helped out with the band Benefits from the UK, drumming with them. But I think it's really important. I mean, none of it affects therapy, and in fact, it's really good for therapy because a lot of people that would listen to Jaw wouldn't listen to therapy, or if they did, maybe they would only listen to early therapy records that are a bit more industrial. So that's good. They kind of, some people that have got into JAAW have actually got back into therapy again. And I know with something like Benefits, there are a bunch of young people. People have seen Neil drumming and gone, he's a fantastic drummer. He's in a band called Therapy, and they go, oh God, I'll have to check them out. And then they will start coming to our shows. So it's really, really good for everybody. And also that works the other way around. Therapy fans start buying JAAW Benefits records too.
I'm thinking about the fact that it's probably a bit easier when your creativity is more or less associated with something and extreme to a degree, but difficult for somebody who is initially signed to electronic record label like, let's say, Warp,
Mm-hmm.
being a fan of black metal and
Mm-hmm.
get into that side of things, isn't it? According to your opinion, in my opinion, it was a very organic transition for you
Mm-hmm.
to do things you've been doing with JAAW.
Oh no, that's exactly right. I mean, a lot of whenever I met the JAAW guys, because I'd never met them before, whenever I first met them, um, they had a lot of the same influences as early therapy. So, they're a lot younger, but they were talking about Godflesh and Fudge Tunnel and Chrome and bands like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they were younger guys, so they didn't hear those guys first time around. That was just something they get into later. But I was old enough to have been around and got into those guys first time. Yeah, so I mean, I know what you mean. If we suddenly made an ambient record or a dream pop record, I think people would be a bit more suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with something like JAWW, Benefits, and Haunch, it's got enough characteristics that people will think, oh yeah, okay, well that's cool. Yeah.
And how do you manage to keep the balance between yourself being a wonderful lyricist and and a romantic, in my opinion, and a fan of noise rock, especially taking into account that with this project you're gravitating to to more to noise and to expressive side of things versus being a lyricist.
Well, with something like John, the pressure was off because I didn't have to write the lyrics. The lyrics were co-written with Wayne, and we did something which I've never done before. We wrote the lyrics from scratch. So he would say, "Okay, I've got an idea for this title. I've watched a movie, and the title is called Bring Home the Mother Lode Barry. This is what the song's about." And he would say the first line, maybe the first two lines, and then I would come up with something. And it was all done very quickly. So it didn't come from a great deal of personal experience. It came from wordplay with Wayne, and it was cool. It was a really good way to write it. Whenever I write with therapy, it comes from a personal place, and that is can sometimes be quite difficult to write. But what was good about doing this thing with Wayne is it made me realize that I don't always have to put myself under so much pressure. So maybe for the next therapy album, I could try and give myself a bit of a break when it comes to writing lyrics so that it doesn't have to be so heavily thought through. It can be a lot more relaxed and a lot more fun.
But still, like, no matter what you're doing, I think there's always been this incredible sense of melodics included in your songwriting. Even if
Mm,
we would take some of the heaviest songs of yours, like
mhm,
Disgraceland or Cheese
mhm,
Grinder, like when I listen to these songs, I can easily imagine them played in an acoustic version, which is
mhm.
something you've already done with therapy and on your own. Do you think there is a certain sense of melody and maybe melodicness you're putting in your songwriting that makes these songs so appealing to your listener, or there is something else that probably comes from like your personal experience or methods of writing?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, really. I think the reason why there's so much melody and memorable lyric and memorable melodies in my writing is simply for the fact when I learned to play guitar, a lot of friends of mine learned to play guitar at the same time, and friends of mine that were in metal or into punk wanted to play like Iron Maiden, AC/DC, and they would spend hours learning the guitar solos. I was taught, I was fans of Buzzcocks, Undertones, Ramones, and a friend of mine, when I was learning to play guitar, showed me some chords, and he said, if you use these chords, you can work out these songs. So I didn't spend all my time from the age of 13 or 14 trying to play solos like the Michael Schenker Group or Iron Maiden or AC/DC or anything like that. I tried writing songs like the Buzzcocks. So from a very, very early age, I would play just chords and sing along. And then later on, I discovered how to play riffs and how to play lead guitar and bits like that. But I think the first thing I tried to do was whenever I learned how to play guitar was use it as a method to write melody. Whereas a lot of my friends just wanted to be able to be the first guy to be able to play, I don't know, Eruption by Van Halen. So it was, so like, I would meet friends of mine, they'd be able to play the Eruption solo and would say, what have you learned? And I've gone, well, I've written this song. So I always thought that was um, a bit more beneficial to me. And in fact, years ago when we did the album Crooked Timber with Andy Gill, who was a big influence on me as a guitar player growing up, we had this same discussion. And Andy said a really good thing to me. He said, to be honest, I agree. He said, I play chords and I don't know what the name of the chords are. He said, I've taught them myself, but I knew that when I would write them, I'd be able to get John to sing with them. So I never thought about guitar magazines talking about me being a great guitarist. I thought this will help serve the song. And I was saying to him that I was the same thing. And he said it was because of punk with him, punk rock and Dr. Feelgood and people like that taught him that once you have a basic grasp of a guitar, you can start writing songs. You don't have to be Angus Young or Van Halen to start writing songs. All you need is a few chords and the desire to write a melody.
When I interviewed just in person, we've
Mm-hmm.
spoken a lot about the change from punk rock to post-punk and how
Mm-hmm.
the ethic level obviously being overthought to a degree, and the difference between values of the 70s and the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And being a person whose upbringing took place in the 70s, you got the chance to see evolution of the artists like, the
Mm-hmm.
Buzzcocks, the Smiths, and,
Mm-hmm.
something as radical as Flipper and Black Flag. So,
Mm-hmm.
what impression did you get discovering the richness and the sound and form, sometimes coming from the exact same place, which also inspired you, simply by taking, a Gang of Four, Buzzcocks, and,
Mm-hmm.
maybe once again the Banshees?
Well, that was with me. It was the songs always came first. So whenever I started writing songs, but then whenever I would listen to people like Joy Division, the Banshees, Killing Joke, Gang of Four, I would start maybe trying to play my guitar a bit like them. And then because I'd grown up playing really simple chords and singing over them, I found it easy to find melodies over the chords. So whenever therapy started, that meant that I didn't have to just play nice, pretty chords. I'd already had said what post punk taught me was that it was possible to write really amazing melodies over quite dark guitar parts. So that was almost like it was an education for me listening to all those post punk records.
When it was spoken for the last time, you mentioned that you are at the point of your career when you develop your ideas very easy and organically. But
Mm-hmm.
when there is this sense of experiment, which is very characteristic for post-punk, specifically, I keep on speaking to every guest on this podcast about Keith Levine, who was a dear friend of mine. But like, if you think about like his contribution, it's really incredible. I think he brought this sense of dangerous experiment that was really important for post-punk.
Mm-hmm.
So, what gives you an understanding that these things would work when you try to unite different elements in your work? Because sometimes you come up with something brilliant but so different, and the fact that these things get united in the song structure, makes me amazed with like what you're doing.
Well, I think Keith Levine's a good point because I think Keith Levine, to me as a post punk fan, was the first time I heard post punk guitar where I thought this is truly psychedelic. It was visceral and psychedelic guitar, especially on the Metal Box album, because all of a sudden, rather than just listening to John Lydon and the bass and the dub beats are great, you could find yourself with that record just listening to the guitar, and it would take you on a journey of its own. And the way he plays things when you try as a guitar player trying to work out how he plays them, it's really it's so effortless for him to play them that way. But as somebody that grew up on just standard punk rock guitar chords, it's a strange way to play guitar. But what's good about Keith David is it's exciting. And I think a lot of the things that he taught me are probably just I heard that Metal Box when I was 14 years of age, and I was beginning to play guitar. So those things that I don't even think about, they're naturally in my guitar playing DNA. And to this day, he's one of the people, if I still put on any record that Keith Levine's been involved in, I still go, high on earth did he think of that pattern, those notes, the way he times them, the guitar sound he has. And I don't know if I told you a few years ago when we played in Cardiff on Wheels, Keith turned up and we were playing with a band called the Membranes, and he joined them on stage and played a song with them. And it was a Membranes song, actually, not one of his. And we were in the dressing room and we said, well, we wonder when Keith's on. And literally, I knew from the first two notes he played that it was Keith Levine, because we didn't know whereabouts in the Membrane set. And I went out onto the balcony of the concert hall and watched him play. But I knew from hearing the first two notes that Keith Levine joined them on stage. It's incredible. Yeah.
He got really incredible tone. I recall like all these phone calls we got with him where while still like we were talking about something and he was playing like all the time, like he was really full of ideas. And even if it was more to sort of a hard rock side of things, because he was a big fan of bands like Stone Temple Pilots, surprisingly.
Yeah.
Like you could still tell that that's him, even if once again if it got to that side of things.
I can see that though with Stone Temple Pilots, because I remember being on tour in America with Therapy, and Stone Temple Pilots come out, and all the press said they were just a poor man's Pearl Jam. They were a terrible band, but I used to like them. And I mentioned I was talking to Neil Cooper in Therapy a few weeks ago about Stone Temple Pilots, thinking he would go, "Oh God, they were terrible." Went, "Oh no, I love Stone Temple Pilots." He said, if you listen to some of the chords they use in tracks like Plush, or the rhythm of a track like Vaseline, it's not Pearl Jam. They had something, I think, and I can understand where Keith Levine as a guitar player would listen to them and go, especially a track like Plush, would go, that's actually fantastic, because it's not just big, distorted, gnarly chords. It's almost like a beautiful 70s glam rock track, but with a strange exotic chord shapes in it.
Getting to Heart Cold Fire, because obviously I've been listening to this record over the course of the last 2 weeks. As far as I know, that there was a lot of lyrical work in between you and Michael, isn't it?
None of the lyrics between me and Michael. It was music. Some of the songs we co-wrote. That was we've started this in the last few years, because I used to write most of the music. I still write all the lyrics and all the melodies, but a few years ago, Michael started sending me things on his via email and asking me what I thought. And the ideas are really good. And I think Michael spends a lot of time. He's got a small area out the back of his house with a recording setup, so it's really handy. So if we're writing material, he'll go, listen, here's 5 ideas. If you can get anything out of these ideas, and we're just honest with each other. And for this album, he sent me Poundland of Hope and Glory, the main guitar riff. He sent me the guitar riff of Two Wounded Animals. And they were like, well, especially Two Wounded Animals, when I first heard it, I thought this is magnificent. So I took it and I added a chorus and we played it together. But it's the same with Neil Cooper. The track Woe, the second track on the album, Neil can't play guitar, but he's got a little synthesizer. So he sent me a synthesizer line going, and said, I don't know if you can play this on guitar, Andy, but I've got an idea for a riff. So I downloaded it and I listened to it, and I've got a little electro harmonics pog, which makes it kind of almost like a synth-like sound. So I listened to the notes, I worked out what notes he was playing, and I played along with it. And then I sent it to Michael and Neil, said, listen, this is Neil's idea, but I've transposed it to the guitar. What do you guys reckon of this? And then we went from there, and that was the track. So we've always kind of done stuff like that. But what's happened in the past is maybe we've got in to do an album. We've had maybe 15 songs and we need 10. And occasionally the tracks that those guys have written haven't made it to the album because we maybe haven't finished them properly or they're not as strong. But in the last couple of records, they've begun to contribute, and it's great. I like it because it takes a lot of the pressure off me. I still have to do the melodies and the lyrics, but I like it. I wouldn't. None of us. At the same time, if I bring in a piece of music to those guys and they don't like it, It's not the kind of band where they have to do it. If they don't like a song I've written, they'll go, "No, that's not really for us," and I'll go, "That's okay." Because all three of us have to like something before we move ahead with it.
Sure, but even still, like if we would think about this, because it's really like the longest lineup of therapy right now, and probably the most actual question would be what pushed this transition to more sort of collective involvement of all of you getting ideas and developing them together.
I think it's a mixture of organic behavior and also the fact that in all the years we've been together, it's hard to believe, but we haven't really had many arguments.
Hmm.
We There's something in the three of us that has got a lot of respect for each other. Whenever Fife was in the band, he was a great guy and a great drummer, but we used to fight all the time, and that didn't last very long. And then whenever Neil and Martin were in the band, we touched on this earlier. It was difficult because, frankly, I think those guys wanted to be rock stars, and we just wanted to play the band, and that made it difficult as well because it was a very political thing. But when Neil joined the band, he's been in a lot of bands himself. He's some guy that we knew for a long time ago. We respect him as a musician. And the three of us have got this kind of bullshit free zone. So, like, if we don't let anyone get away with behavior that would piss the other guy off. And that's the thing now where I think they feel confident that they can send ideas to me without me going, I write the songs. And I also, I'm not precious about who writes therapy songs. I mean, the only reason that I write the lyrics and the melodies um, is because I'm the only one that'll do that. To this day, I've never been given any lyrics or melodies by Michael or Neil, and if they did, I would certainly listen to them. But regarding writing of riffs and things like that, I'm totally all up for it.
How do you usually work on the lyrical aspects of your songs?
It can differ. So something like "Joy" of Hard Cold Fire was written simultaneously with the riff. So I had the guitar in my room, just and I got a melody. And I had a little idea based on the writings of Samuel Beckett about how repetition and boredom can make people quite dull. And because the melody's almost like a child's nursery rhyme, I wrote the song really quickly. Another day, another day. And it came to me really quickly. But with other stuff, like, say, I mentioned Woe, we're Poundland of Hope and Glory, I'll come up with a melody. So whenever we rehearse it, I'll just be singing da 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 da. And then I begin to feel under pressure. I think I have to write something, but then it'll click. So Poundland of Hope and Glory came from watching this terrible documentary on about classical music in Britain, and then the song kind of wrote itself. Yeah, so it's one of those two ways. I'll either write something really quickly, so songs like Scream Major, Nowhere, Joy are written together with just old school guitar, sitting down melody, and then 15, 20 minutes later, most of the song's written. Or the music will be there for a long time, and it's not until we get the inspiration that we'll finish the lyrics.
Quite a lot of your lyrics is existential, and not because you're writing from the first person, but you are asking obvious questions about
Mhm,
life, death, God, reality.
mhm,
And the last aspect is something you've touched previously with such works of yours as Nurse or Troublegum.
mhm.
So what made you to get back to exploring this specific problematic or theme within the new record?
I think it's just age. It's just, I think I've always been angry and I've always been reactionary, but I think as I've gotten older, things like the British government have really pissed me off. And it's not something when therapy. It was almost like when therapy were young. There's more things to piss us off than the government because everyone hates the government. You know
Mm.
what I mean? So it was like, well, everybody else sings about that. We'll sing about it in our own way. But as you get a lot older, you feel more comfortable. I think. Well, I feel a lot more comfortable directing it. Like Poundland of Hope and Glory is a good
Mm-hmm.
example of the album, and that just comes with age. I think. We have been doing this for well over 30 years now, um, and it's what feels natural. I think that has become something. And on the last record as well, on Cleave, we had things like Dumb Down and Wreck It Like Beckett, and they were quite similar. They were a lot more direct.
And how did your view on those things, like, once again, like, change after getting older? And what's more important, after becoming a parent, because obviously it really affects your worldview, and you start thinking about things you've never been thinking before, like, how my kids would live in this world and so on.
Well, I think that's something that whenever my son got to the age when I could talk to him about these kind of things, that did enter my head. Because whenever they're young, all you want to do is protect your kids. And then they get to the age where they don't want to hang about with their dad because it's uncool. And then they get to the age where you can actually have a conversation with them because they're young men, young adults, young women. And that's at the point whenever you realize the things that worry them are different. A lot of them are different to the things that worried us as kids. Whenever we were kids growing up in the 70s and 80s, everyone thought that nuclear holocaust would be the end of the world. Everyone thought, after Hiroshima, um, and the Cold War and everything like that, that at some point USA and the West and the East. And then as you get older, that didn't happen. But then you realize the real threat now is what's going on with the planet and global warming and division. And all I can do is talk to my son about it and listen. So that's the most important thing I think with anyone with children, is to listen to them.
I've been thinking, like, about what all these things you mentioned right now, and thinking that's probably my view on your music from, like, when I discovered it. It was basic, and I think that's true for a lot of people, because in the 90s you sort of developed a very specific situation similar to the word goth in a very dogmatic
Mhm.
meaning. So, how does it make you feel right now? That really comes, in hand with the lyrics and the
Mhm.
problems you've been
Yeah.
touching. Like, even if I would think about, like, the iconic songs of yours,
Mhm.
like, Turn, Gun,
Mhm.
those things I remember probably more than Nowhere or Screaming.
I'm very comfortable with how I'm perceived as a writer now because I think I I'm very comfortable within myself with it. There was a little point, I suppose, in the mid '90s when the band was very, very popular, and there would be a lot of reviews, and people would always criticize about being miserable or being, a bit too depressing. But I'm not going to start changing writing songs because that would be dishonest of me. And then after a while, I get really comfortable with it, and I just think, well, yeah, there's always a bit of what we do is always very Irish. I think there's a way of being depressed that is Irish,
Hmm.
that runs through Samuel Beckett and Flann O'Brien and William Butler Yeats and James Joyce. And I think there's a bit of that in everybody that comes from the island of Ireland. In the creative arts, there's a little bit of dark humor, and I've felt very comfortable with it. And I think if someone doesn't like the lyrics or someone doesn't like the way I look at life, that's okay because I don't like certain songs that look at life in other ways too. But there's enough music and enough styles of music out there for everybody. But yeah, I'm happy with the place I hold at the minute in myself.
And still, like, you have these incredible songs like To Disappear from Hardcore Fire, which still, like, which shows that your worldview isn't radically changes, like, you are still true to yourself,
Mhm.
which really puts me towards the question, are you a pessimist yourself?
I think I am, but I find comfort in pessimism because I think as a very young child, I got very disappointed by life in certain situations. I remember when I went to school. Most kids dread going to school, but I was really excited because I thought it'd be an exciting new world. And of course, all kids are cruel, and
Mm.
and it's school. I mean, it's not a very nice time until you find your place in school. So I was disappointed in that, and I think I learned as a way of coping with life. If I came to expect the worst, then I wouldn't be hurt as much. And that was a young child thinking, and I suppose part of that has stayed with me in life. So that has thankfully matured a lot as I've got older. But I'm still very pessimistic. I'm a lot more trusting of people, because I've had a family. I've got a good relationship with my family. I've got a good relationship with the band and my friends over the years. But I think as regards how things in life will turn out, it works to my advantage if I'm pessimistic.
I think that's also was something that you brought to masses, because obviously, like, when you get signed and people, I think not all the people do understand like how important was the fact that the band like Therapy got to a major label, because at once you got you being fans of independent record labels like Touch and Go, or all sorts of informal music that was really actual by then, that really got reflected in your creativity, and you've been sort of pushing that ethics to the masses.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite incredible whenever we look back at it that a band that like Butthole Surfers, Jesus Lizard, Slint, and Big Black were signed to a major, because I think major labels probably thought they'd signed a grunge band when they signed Therapy. They probably thought three-piece band, heavy guitars, there's a little bit of melody in there. But Therapy's musical taste was always a lot broader than just a grunge band, and that confused quite a lot of people. But I think there was enough attitude. I think a lot of people that identified with Therapy that felt the way we do. We came from a country where there was division. We didn't look like rock stars. We didn't feel like rock stars. We actually felt as if we were kind of on the outside of life looking in. And I think the people that like Therapy, some of the same people that like bands like Manic Street Preachers, Nine Inch Nails, um, they saw a little bit of that. If our, whenever they looked at us, they saw a little bit of themselves in it, and that gave them comfort. Probably the same way whenever I was a kid, a lot of those post-punk bands gave me comfort, like Joy Division, The Cure, people like that. I found things in their music that was comforting, and I think that's maybe what people found in Therapy, especially in the mid-90s.
And do you think that right now, like after the decades, like especially with the Heart Cold Fire, because I've been looking at the reaction, and every record of yours, like you released over the course of the last 15 years, got really a lot of the positive reviews, even though like you are doing this working with independent record labels, so you
Mm-hmm.
don't get this machinery of major labels that obviously would push you a lot further, but still things are comparable right now, which is both amazing for me working in the music business as a PR person and knowing how bad it can be, where you're pushing something with an extreme degree of individuality, and people won't notice this because it's not a part of a distribution chain, or people don't have any different motivation to push it.
Yeah, it can be difficult, but there's not really anything you can do. So I had a good discussion with a Czech writer that runs one of the big Czech radio stations, and we're his favorite band, and he's part of the radio station. And he said, "You're my favorite band, and I love your songs, but I can't get everybody else in the radio station to agree to play Therapy." But what can we do? There's not anything we can do. I mean, some bands would panic and think, "Oh, we need to maybe make a really wacky video, or we need to maybe start writing songs that will get played in the radio." But to a certain extent, we had a period in the '90s when we did get played in the radio. Um, there's not really any, we don't feel compelled to write songs that get that. We will always try our best. Whenever we talk to people that do the PR for Marshall, we will say what's the best can happen to get radio play, because we want people to hear the record, not because we want to be famous, but because the more people hear the record, the more countries we can tour, the more the more we get out to meet friends and meet new people. But yeah, I mean, we were very close with Hardcore Fire. We actually got a lot more radio play than we have done in many, many years, which took us by surprise. But that was because we touched on this earlier, Dan. There was people working in radio stations that were Therapy fans when they were 14 that now work at radio stations, and they haven't played. They all of a sudden they're now part of a station that's got the new Therapy record. They go, God, I'll give this a spin. So we were getting play in a lot of places that we hadn't been played in years. So it's one of those things, and there's not. I think you have to be careful as a band that's been around for over 3 decades, how you're perceived. Because in music like ours, people can really, really sense if you're not being sincere. And I think if you try and chase coverage, you try and chase PR, it's never going to work. It has to be organic. And we will do everything that we can to make sure that people will hear the record. That's the best we can do. We always say to our PR people, look, we know that you're not going to get radio play with certain stations, but at least make sure you get, if we give you a list, make sure that radio station's got the tune. And if they turn around and go, yeah, we don't like those guys, or who are these guys, or it's not for us, fine. But if we find out that you haven't given them the track, then we'll have a problem. Because it's like we're just we make a record, we want lots of people to hear it. But if 20 radio stations get the track and 19 of them go, we're not interested, then that's okay. We're not gonna start phoning them up and go, you must play us,
Mm-hmm.
But this is where we're very comfortable with the situation, and I think that's the best way that we deal with it.
And that really makes your experience with JAAW a bit more interesting, because it was really the projects that took me by surprise. And I think a lot of the most of your fans, like, nobody expected you to do something like this, even though, once again, it was really notable. Just like we had spoken about Kit Levine, I really heard like your guitar tone, like the way you perform, and obviously your vocal phrasing. So what it was like for you to work on this project, on the contrary with Heart Cold Fire, where you know you like, your expectations weren't really defined by the fact that you already have the fan base, and it was basically the ground zero.
Yeah, that was good actually. I really liked it because it was something that took my mind and it took my way of writing somewhere different. Because with the writing of the Joe record, I would get sent a drum beat
Mm-hmm.
and that would be it. So like Adam Betts would just say, "I've got this drum beat," and that was it. There was no bass line, there was no keyboards. It was just, and I would put my headphones on and I would get my guitar, and then I knew I wasn't going to play like therapy. There'd be bits of it will sound like me, but so I was just having fun. And then I went down to the studio for 2 days and Wayne added some synthesizers. And because we did the vocals on the day, I wasn't sitting at home trying to come up with a really memorable melody that would fit the music the way I would with therapy. I was just going in and having a bit more free form. And I didn't do all the vocals on the Jaw record. I shared that with Wayne. So that was really good as well. But it was quite liberating because it was, I said to the guys in therapy, actually, we did the record. It was done very, very quickly. I think I was in the studio for 4 days total, 2 days with vocals, 2 days with guitar, and that's for 8 tracks. Then we went and we did 4 concerts, and we had I think, 4 concerts with 2 days rehearsal, and we played to maybe 100 people a night in these small venues. And I wasn't in the middle of the stage, I was right to one side of the concert hall, and all I did for most of the concert was play guitar, and
Mm-hmm.
that was I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was good fun, and there was no pressure. But then again, once I went back to do the first therapy shows after the Jaw tour, I absolutely really appreciated what I had in therapy because I thought, oh, this is incredible. The first gigs back were outdoor festivals, lots of people, everyone singing all the songs, and it made me appreciate what I have in therapy a lot more.
One of the probably most important, whenever you would release the new therapy records, there still would be talks of people comparing it to well-known works of yours,
Mhm.
first and foremost Troublegum. But
Yeah.
if you are a creator, like, you can't really pick any record and say that that's better than this one, because obviously, I think for every musician, all their works are like children, that you can't really say that this child is better than this one.
Mhm.
Right.
That's
So
good. Yeah.
that, to me, it's really difficult, a difficult situation, and that really causes a lot of artistic conflicts. At least that's what I notice working with artists all the time. That there would be people who would be asking you some questions all the time, no matter like what you would be doing. And it's really, sometimes it pushes artists to ask themselves really difficult existential questions.
Well, it can be frustrating, but I think the way I look at it with something like Troublegum with therapy is I'm incredibly grateful that we have a Troublegum. It's like Troublegum is our Nevermind, it's our Rain and Blood, it's our Master of Puppets. It's our OK Computer. It's the one record that if everyone talks to, most bands have got a record. Most well-known bands have got a record that most people associate them with. And I remember, of all people, Lemmy from Motorhead once was asked, "Do you not get really tired of people always saying about Ace of Spades?" He went, "Well, I'm just glad we have Ace of Spades." Because there's a lot of bands out there that have played for years that don't have a Troublegum. They've maybe got 3 or 4 albums, but none of them ever made an impact on people's lives like Troublegum. So it can be frustrating when people review it, but I think those people that review it or talk about it like that with modern records, they'll probably listen to Faith No More and go, "Well, it's not Angel Dust," or they'll probably listen to a Metallica record and go, "It's not as good as Master of Puppets." And it's just part of being in a band that's had a popular record in the '90s, and I don't mind it. I think ironically, if we set out to make a record like Troublegum 2, people would probably go, "Yes, yes, it's going to happen," but it wouldn't have the same thing. Troublegum was made by certain people at a certain point in their lives, and that's why it sounds the way it does. And that's not something that you can manufacture. And the records that we've made since are all reflections of where we are in our lives now. So I think it's as far as I'm concerned, yes, it can be frustrating, but at the same time, I have to always tell myself that I'm lucky that there is a Troublegum in existence. The part of the reason why I'm talking to you now, Dan, is because we made a record called Troublegum. If that record hadn't have been a success, a lot of people across the world would never have heard of therapy. So I'm grateful for it to a certain extent, but yes, I admit it can be frustrating.
What we've touched previously, you mentioned that, like, there are some qualities that really, make you a specific, like, a Northern Irish band, in a
Mhm,
sense of humor, worldview, which made me really think about James Joyce
mhm.
to a degree. So, like, where you are right now, like many decades after you've started, and you've started specifically in Northern Ireland, are there any other qualities that make you an Northern Irish band? Because still, like, the local musical climate is really very unique, and I think, like, the fact you've started with Warzone Collective,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, it's
Yeah.
really made a certain contribution, because every local scene is unique on its own.
No, I think there's a certain thing in bands from Northern Ireland that exists, especially guitar bands that maybe play agitated and aggressive music, punk or metal, especially. There's a history of melody in Ireland itself. It's got a rich theme of melody throughout the island, and that you can trace it back to bands like Horselips in the '70s. Thin Lizzy is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Stiff Little Fingers during the punk era wrote some of the most memorable punk songs. The Undertones, everyone knows, are a fantastic pop band. You can go right through the bands I liked, Rudy, that were on the Good Vibrations label,
Mm-hmm.
and then right up now through to bands like there's a really good band called Problem Patterns that are write incredibly incisive, noisy songs. Now their debut album came out on Friday. It's called Blouse Club.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like an Albini produced album when you listen to it. It could be McCluskey, it could be No Means No, it could be Pavement. But beneath all the noise of the guitars, there's these gorgeous melodies, these wonderful melodies. And I just thought when I listened to that record on Friday, they could only come from north of Ireland.
Mm-hmm. And what reaction did your Northern Irish fans had when you performed the acoustic version of your material?
We only did one show in Dublin with we did a few with the band. Yeah, the acoustic songs. Yeah, we did a show in Belfast once, and it went down. It was sold out, and it was in an old theatre, and it was the Irish are very rowdy. I don't know what the term would be. Very lively.
Mm.
Whenever we played in mainland Europe, Germany, Holland, France, Austria, there would be like almost a solemn quiet in the theatre. But when you play in Ireland, that's not going to happen. So like the whole way through the acoustic show, people are shouting and sort of teasing you and stuff like that. And people that I went to school with turned up and started shouting at me and stuff. But that was what I expected, and it was great fun. So in a way, that it was perfect because it meant that it became like rather than playing a concert to people, it became a bit like sharing ideas back and forward in one room, which is what made it special.
I think one of the beauty of really a rock performance is the fact that you can interpret some of your well-known songs in a different way, and they would become, something really incredible, which is once again goes to AC/DC and maybe Angus Young falling on stage and doing things that he didn't make on the recording, but the fact
Hmm.
that you do all these mistakes that really make a contribution to incredible performance.
Yeah, I suppose that's what keeps the music alive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think different interpretations. It's a difficult thing to do, but I think if you we see everything that we've done as one piece. It's a bit like Samuel Beckett used to see everything that he'd ever written and performed as one piece. He said he called it the work. He said it was just all continuous. And I used to find that quite strange when I was younger, but I see what he means now. And I think with therapy, if we revisit old songs, you find things in them that at the time you didn't notice. And sometimes it's good to bring those things to the fore. And recently we were playing in rehearsals. There's an album we did in 1998 called Semi Detached.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew it got reissued on Friday there. We knew that we might play some songs from it on a tour, but they were played as a four piece. So I sat down with my guitar to work out to see if we could play any of these songs as a three piece. And I'd forgotten a lot of the ideas that we had in guitars, and it was things that I'd forgotten about. Whenever I was playing them, we were practicing some of these songs, and because Neil wasn't there when we did the album, I was playing some of these guitar riffs, and he wasn't that familiar with the song, so he would come in playing his interpretation of the drums, and we were going, "This is really good." You know, we could do a version of this song of Semi Detached in this style because this is the way the three of us play it now. You know, over like 25 years after the album was released, but it keeps the music alive. So, like, you know, by us going out and doing acoustic sets or dropping old songs into the set, it means that, you know, it gives a relevance to the songs that people will still maybe want to go back and revisit them.
I recently discovered, because my friend's band celebrated the 30 years anniversary of the debut record they had put out, produced by Albini, is the
Hmm.
fact that after a certain period of time, like no matter what was the initial reaction,
Hmm.
people would start appreciating the things based on on the fact that how many years had passed. And
Hmm.
I think right now the good example of that is the fact that a lot of the shitty music from back 20 years before now got released. It sort of became really popular, and the fact that 20 years had passed makes people to get back to those things probably due to nostalgia. But it also happens with the good music, so whatever people would get back to their old favorites, just like I got recently to Nurse, which is probably one of my all-time favorite records of yours, and in my
Hmm.
list, I really discovered some incredible things I probably didn't notice for over like the first 40 times of listening to that record.
Yeah. Wow, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah, I know what you mean. I listened to Entertainment by Gang of Four
Uh
recently, and I was surprised at how poppy it was.
huh.
'Cause I remember as a kid thinking it was like really, really quite a strange, and it was very abrasive, and the guitar was angular, and the vocals were just statements shouted. But when I listened to it, it's really melodic, and the guitar chords are melodic. But I didn't. Whenever I was an angry 15-year-old kid, you know, I just thought this is Gang of Four. It's exciting. It's dangerous, and now I hear it in a completely different way. And I think it's the same with therapy, is that people can hear stuff like maybe Infernal Love that was released in 1995. That
Mm.
the fans of Troublegum, a lot of them thought it was terrible, or they thought it was a very strange record. But when you go and listen to it now, years later, it's like, okay, right, I didn't realize that. You know, that it was like a lot of people didn't realize that there was a kind of avant-garde jazz bit in the first track. You know,
Mm.
it was like people missed that. They just thought, "Oh, this isn't Knives off Troublegum." So, they didn't listen to it further.
You've always had a difficult story about creating of that record, and we all know how much of a pressure you got going through the creative
Mm.
process. How much did you change your attitude over this work of yours getting through the years?
Well, from a personal point of view towards the record, I still can't think about that record because it was difficult to make. But the one thing that has given me happiness is what that record means to other people. I mean, over the years, so many people have told me incredible things about how that record saved their lives, about how special that record is to them, about how much they were going through a difficult time and that record got them through. And at the time, I didn't know. All I just knew was that therapy fans worldwide were angry because it wasn't Troublegum, the record label, were angry because it didn't sell as well as they thought it would, and the critics didn't like it because it didn't sound like Troublegum. And I was going through a tough time myself, so it was a perfect storm of negativity. But what's rescued the record for me is how much it means to other people, and at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. The music that we make is to be shared, and to find out that it's had a positive effect on people's life. That means more to me than anything.